Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nikki. I am with the Louisiana DeafBlind Project at the Human Development Center here at LSU Health. We are excited to do this Lunch and Learn with the Lessard Project. I'm joined by Dr. Rose Angelosi, who's my colleague at the DeafBlind Project, and we're going to be talking about resources for families with deaf, blind, or deafblind children. And that's already a mouthful, but I could have made it even longer because, of course, these apply to deaf, hard of hearing, low vision, blind, visually impaired, deaf, blind, that whole world. Hopefully there's something in here that you can take away to share with the families that you work with or to use for your own family if this applies to you. I'm just going to go through some of these resources and we'll talk about how you can use them. But please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go or to come off mute with any questions. And I know there's a lot of different experience and expertise in the Zoom room. So if you all have suggestions, we'll make a little time for that at the end too, if there's any resources that you want to share. So just briefly, the Louisiana DeafBlind Project, like I said, we're at the Human Development Center in LSU Health, but we are a statewide resource that's funded by the Federal Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. So we support students birth through 22 who have combined hearing and vision loss of any degree. And we work with school teams, early intervention providers, transition providers, and families as well, all throughout the state. So if there is a student in your life that we're not connected to, please feel free to reach out after this Lunch and Learn. We are a resource for you. We do an annual deaf-blind child count, which is separate from the Part B child count. We do training, PDs, workshops, student observation, just kind of informal coming in and consulting. We can talk about assistive technology, communication, accommodations in the classroom, those types of things. And yeah, we're glad for you to join us today. So I just like to start always by saying what deaf-blind means, because it's in the name of our project and there's a lot of misconceptions. And then we'll talk about resources. So deaf-blind refers to a huge range and diversity of students. So it can include any degree of combined hearing and vision loss, or combined, differences in hearing and vision levels. So most kids that are on the deaf-blind census and that we support, their parents might not say, my kid's deaf-blind. Their IEP might not say this child is deaf-blind. In fact, most of the time it does not. But our definition is broad. It's not limited to Louisiana Department of Ed regulations. And so even if your student isn't classified as deaf-blind, if they have any combination of those sensory disabilities, they probably can receive support from us, and your teams probably can receive support from us. So reach out. We also work with kids that have processing based diagnoses, cortical visual impairment, auditory processing disorder, as well as diagnosed progressive losses like Usher syndrome. Yeah, so sensory disabilities like being deaf, hard of hearing, being blind, low vision, or deaf-blind are disabilities of access and information gathering. So I just say this kind of as the framing of a lot of the work that we do. They're not inherently in and of themselves cognitive or intellectual disabilities, but rather they mean that a student is going to learn in a very different way. And they're going to be missing a lot of incidental information. We learn through our sight and our hearing, typical sighted hearing people. And so if a child is not getting access or is getting incomplete access to that sensory information, then we just have to find ways to supplement that and provide access differently and teach some of those incidental things in a more explicit, experiential way. So that's kind of the framework for a lot of what we do. Many of the kids that are deafblind that we support have other additional disabilities, about 90% of them. So there's some resources in here for kids that are using a traditional symbolic way of communicating and are maybe in a mainstream classroom, accessing literacy through Braille or assistive technology. And we also support kids that are in self-contained classrooms and maybe are using AAC or emerging communicators and are going to access literacy in a really different way. So there's a wide variety of resources for a wide variety of students. So a lot of the families that we work with experience a real scarcity of resources here in Louisiana. I'm sure that's not news to any of y'all. A lot of districts don't have teachers of the deaf, teachers of the visually impaired. Families sometimes are quite overwhelmed by the number of different programs and experts and people calling them and registries to get on with their kids with sensory disabilities. And so that's something that's important to remember. And so oftentimes there are resources outside of, the school district that the family might not have accessed yet. For example, when a kid is identified as deaf or hard of hearing, the family immediately gets a call and they get referred to the parent support organization. They get referred to the outreach program from LSD. They get a bunch of stuff all at once. And then, sometimes years later, another referral back to that parent support organization can be really helpful. Also, Families Helping Families, of course, is the broader parent organizing parent center for the state too. And so it's just good to revisit those periodically with your families and make sure they know what's out there. A lot of the families we work with, their kids have a lot of medical involvement. They might have been in the hospital a lot when they were young, or maybe they're still in the hospital a lot. And that brings a lot of fear and grief and trauma and uncertainty. And so in our work with families, we try to always remember that, they have been through a lot and they know their child better than anyone else. And we're one of a million professionals that's trying to guide them to help their child grow and learn, and to really keep that humility and that openness to whatever the first, biggest priority for that family is in terms of supporting their child, which might be different than what I think it should be, but it's not my kid. So yeah. And then there's also a limited base of knowledge amongst many professionals about deaf blindness specifically, and sometimes also about deaf, hard of hearing kids and blind, low vision kids, just because it is a low incidence disability. And so a lot of our training programs, a lot of our, amazing leaders and experts in school districts don't actually come across a ton of deaf, blind, or deaf blind kids. So that is something families deal with. And then they also interface with a lot of services that are not always coordinated. So that's kind of the landscape we're looking at. To help support families through a lot of this, there are some broad and some specific family organizations that it's good for you all to be aware of. So of course, Families Helping Families, which is our parent center here in Louisiana. So they're also federally funded. And their regional network of Families Helping Families. So Families Helping Families of Greater New Orleans being the parent center for the state, and then each region has their own Families Helping Families. They're a wonderful resource to plug families into. They have a lot of different programs for different ages and different types of needs. Louisiana Hands and Voices is specifically for parents who have deaf or hard of hearing or deaf blind children. Their staff are all fellow parents, and they can help some with advocacy. They can help with getting families connected to resources. They're super knowledgeable. They can troubleshoot anything from, what do you do when your kid doesn't want to wear their hearing aids, to my kid's the only deaf kid in their class. Like, how can I find peers for him? They are a great resource, and they do have events periodically. They have regional staff members in each region too. So you can always shoot me an email if you want to get connected in order to pass some of your families along to them. The Louisiana chapter of the National Federation of the Blind has a division of parents of blind children that is pretty active, and they have a convention that is coming up this month. And they also do a lot of work hand in hand with the Louisiana Center for the Blind. So great to plug parents of blind kids into that. And then we do have an Usher syndrome specific family organization in Louisiana called USH1C, which is a pun on Usher syndrome type 1C, which is the Acadian the most common, the Acadian genetic mutation version of Usher's is USH1C. But of course, we have families with other types of Usher syndrome in Louisiana too. But they have a big event every September in Lafayette. It's really fun. There's information and vendors, and also is like a 5K and mile run race. The picture on my screen is all the kids and adults that have Usher syndrome that were at that event all gathered together. So it's a really wonderful way to connect families if you have any families whose kids have Usher syndrome. So that's a little bit about families. And this next slide says, what do kids need? So the way that I try to conceptualize this is, more than anything, kids need access, right? They need access to communication and the environment. They need access to peers and mentors, to literacy, to that incidental learning, to promote concept development, like I mentioned earlier. They also really need opportunities for social emotional learning, both, in the classroom with their peers, out in the community, whatever, community events are important to their family. It's important that we help figure out a way for kids to have access to those. Kids need access to recreation. Sometimes I feel like we don't talk about this enough, especially in deaf-blind work. Kids need to be able to, go to summer camp or go out and do a fun activity on the weekend, or, have a way to join in their siblings' birthday parties, or all the types of kid stuff that kids do, to play outside, to have games they can play with their friends. And so for our students that have sensory disabilities, sometimes we have to structure those differently or really look for those opportunities, but it's important. And of course, also lastly, self-advocacy skills. And part of that sometimes comes, I think, with just making sure kids have access to adults that have, that are similar to them, whether that's deaf-blind mentors, deaf-blind mentors, as well as just seeing adults with disabilities kind of living their lives and having their families and doing what they do. I think that's really important. So that's also part of why I think as educators, it is really important to support families in seeking some of these community-based resources. So some other statewide resources that are not necessarily family specific, but are still a really great way to plug into, adult mentors and community groups. There is affiliated, and this is probably an incomplete list, I'm sure. So please feel free to add in the chat or come off mute and share if you're like, you left this one out. We want to, we do our best to put everything in one place. So Affiliated Blind of Louisiana, which actually works with the blind and the deaf-blind community, is based in Lafayette. They have events throughout the year. They have a residential training program. They have assistive technology, great, wonderful resource. Louisiana Center for the Blind is up in North Louisiana in Ruston. They have a summer camp coming up, and they have a lot of year-round programming. In addition to, if any of you are working with transition age kids, they have summer transition programming, which is great. Louisiana Association of the Deaf, which kind of merged with Deaf Focus, based in Baton Rouge, is an agency that is great to plug into if you have deaf students and you're looking for deaf, hard of hearing community events and mentors. There's also different deaf action centers throughout the state. So there's one in Lafayette that has some ASL classes. There's a very active one in Shreveport. There's probably some more that I'm leaving out, but if you're in an area that has a deaf action center, they often will have community classes and other ways for kids to connect. Louisiana School for the Deaf and Visually Impaired, even if you don't have students that end up going there, they do have community-facing events. So they have family fun days every spring. They have a summer camp, which I have more information about. And they do sometimes just have other public events, which is a really great way for kids, especially, if any of you are coming from smaller districts where you might have students with sensory disabilities who are the only one in their grade. It's great to get them plugged into some of these events. I know St. Tammany Parish was planning a field trip to bring their deaf, hard of hearing students up to Louisiana School for the Deaf sometime this month for Deaf History Month. So that's just a great example of a way that kids can connect and, meet other students like them. And there's also other community events throughout the year. So we have a newsletter, we try to send stuff out, but there's a ton on social media as well. And so sometimes just printing something out and handing it to a parent or sending it home in a backpack goes a long way in, making sure that parents know and feel welcome out there in these community events. National resources. I linked all of these in the PowerPoint, I should say, so that afterwards, if you're interested, I can email the slides to you so that you can have the links in one place. I know it's a lot of information, so it's not really possible to memorize it, but I wanted to create a document with all of this. So the American Society for Deaf Children has an amazing website. They have a couple in-person conferences throughout the year, but they also have free sign language classes for parents. They have a lot of other programming and resources all in one place. National Federation for the Blind, similarly big national entity, has a ton of wealth of information and resources. National Family Association for Deaf Blind does a lot of advocacy and policy work. Helen Keller National Center works with teenagers through the lifespan who are deaf blind. They have a training center in New York, but they also can work with voc rehab if any of you have students who are in that transition age, to provide support and programming. And then there's a ton of syndrome specific organizations that are national that tend to have conferences and a lot of family support events. The DeafBlind Project, I should say, sets aside a little bit of our funding each year to help support families to go to some of these conferences. So if you're working with a family whose kid is deafblind specifically, and they would like to go to a national conference that's related to their child's deafblindness, they can talk to us. So the Charge Syndrome Foundation has a conference every 2 years. Again, there's a lot of adults with Charge syndrome who go. It's such a great way to connect kids, especially, these are all considered rare syndromes, right? And so we just want kids to grow up knowing that they're not the only person like them on the planet. The Usher Syndrome Coalition also has an in-person conference every 2 years. And then Perkins School for the Blind has a couple different conferences, as well as a ton of information. It is a school that's based in Boston, but it's also a national center. And so they have parent resources. They have lots of resources for teachers if you're looking for quick trainings or downloadable activities. They have a cortical visual impairment center. And so I think I put this on the next slide. Yes. Just to transition into some more education specific resources for families. They are now offering through their CVI center, CVI Now, Cortical Visual Impairment Now, they're offering like one free family consultation for parents whose kids have CVI. So they can get on there for half an hour and talk to one of the experts at the CVI center about really anything, like how to make the home a little bit more accessible for their child with CVI, or what types of things they should talk about in their kiddo's IEP, or what are some literacy strategies they can work on at home, or what other resources are out there. So they're great for CVI. There is a program for if any of you have students that are Braille readers. It's so great to get families, even if, families aren't going to become really proficient Braille readers, it still is great if the family learns a little bit alongside the child so they can support them and read with them at home. Of course, there are books that have print and Braille on them, which is wonderful. But there's a Dots for Families program that has Braille lessons for families. Rose Angelosi has worked with that if any of you all have questions about it, but it's a great program that is something you can just download and set families up with, especially looking at summer break coming up. I was trying to think of things that you all can kind of send home that are more specific for your kiddos that have sensory disabilities to be able to work on with their families and share with their families too what they're learning. There are a gazillion free Braille book programs. There's one that's based in California. There's a national one. There's one for young children that comes with, they mail you a couple Braille books each month, and it comes with a set of like manipulatives. So for kids who are tactile learners, they can actually feel different objects that go with the story. So that's also a great option for deafblind students. And yes, and there's also the Louisiana State Braille Library. It's actually called the Talking Books and Braille Library, but I couldn't bring myself to type talking books since we call them audiobooks now, but it's been around for a long time. So it's a great resource. So yeah, if your kids are Braille readers, please set them up with some of these resources before they go home for the summer. Also, most public libraries have some type of free audiobook app that you can access. I love the one in New Orleans. And so for your kiddos who are blind, low vision, and are auditory learners, that's a great resource to connect them with too, as well as Bookshare, which is more for in school, but if you're not using Bookshare, it's a great program. Pathways to Literacy has a ton of home activities you can do at home. And I'll finish this list and then I'm going to show you a few things. Simple stuff you can do with everyday objects, different types of exploration, different activities you can do to build kids' use of their sense of touch, to build kids' concepts about the world and incidental learning, all that stuff. There's also a free slate and stylus program, which is the way that you write Braille by hand. And so families can get set up with that over the summer. And Rose and I were just talking about this the other day. You can now get Braille Legos in the commercial market. The Lego company sells a set of Braille Legos. It is $90, but if you have a classroom wish list or If your families are doing anything like that, it's a good resource for them to get. If you have blind or low vision students and you want some for school, you can order those through the AIM Center. But for your families, they can just get a set of Braille Legos, which also have the letter printed on them and are really fun. So that's a great learning tool. Okay. Is there anything, I'm going to go ahead and open up a few of these websites, Rose. Is there anything that you want to add to what I've gone through so far? Okay. I'm
I
just
think
gonna,
you're good. You're doing good, Nikki.
okay, great. Thanks, Rose.
All good.
I'm just going to swap my screen here. Can you see my internet browser now? Okay, wonderful. So let me just go back. This is what the Braille Legos look like. So each Lego block has the Braille dots on them. They're of course bigger than what Braille dots actually are, but they're a great learning tool for kids. And, fun way to engage with siblings or other kids in the home too. And to really like lift up the value of, learning Braille for kids. Another thing, so this website, Path to Literacy. It's one of the ones I mentioned that has a ton of, ideas for things you can do at home or you can easily do in the classroom. So this is about experience books. So the idea of an experience book, and I think this is a really good, if you send one thing home with your families to look at this summer, I think this is a good one. The idea of an experience book is it's a way of documenting something that a family does together or something you do together as a class so that you can go back with kids and revisit that and talk about it and kind of build a shared narrative around that experience. So it's great for anticipation, helping prepare kids for transitions or new things. It's great for doing the project together and giving them some ownership in that story. And then it's great after the fact to build memories and shared reference points. And they can be all really different. So the one I have on my screen is one page from Making Cookies with Mom. It has large print handwritten in like a Sharpie or something. And it has an actual couple of measuring spoons attached to the page and then the crinkly Nestle wrapper from the butterscotch chips. And so that is a great example of something that's tactile. So you can read that with the kiddo, but then they can also feel those same objects that they used in that baking experience and remember doing that together. So it doesn't have to be an experience like we drove into New Orleans and, went to the zoo all day. It can also be little things that you do around the home. So that's an example for maybe someone who's a print reader. Here's a couple more examples. Going to Carnival and getting these necklaces. There's a Mardi Gras necklace taped on there. Another one, I went to the high school basketball game and I liked waving the pom-poms. There's some of that shreddy pom-pom material. You can also, let me find one that's in Braille. I think this one. Oh, yes, sorry. Here's one about birds laying eggs and building nests. So you can see there's print on it and there's also Braille with a Braille label maker. So a good thing for families to have at home whose students are learning Braille is that little Braille label maker where you can actually print out little short words. It's obviously not a solution for a whole page of text, but making a simple experience book like this, it's a good strategy. And then let me go back because we're almost out of time. I wanted to show you. Sorry, I'm clicking around. Oh, yes, American Society for Deaf Children. Like I said, they're the ones that have a mentoring program for kids that's online. It's like a peer-to-peer program and a deaf mentoring program that parents of deaf kids can connect to. So really great resource. And then my last list here, and then I'll just put up the camp slide, is Open Hands Open Access modules specifically for deafblind students. They're designed for interveners who are paraprofessionals that work one-on-one with the deafblind student, but they're amazing for families too. There's a lot of strategies families can do at home. Summer is a great time to take American Sign Language classes. There's some online that are very affordable through the School for the Deaf, through the American Society for Deaf Children, through Deaf Focus, and then there's a few in person. So email me if you want resources for that. Those are the deaf mentoring programs I mentioned. And then active learning spaces, things you can make, has again, great how to take everyday objects at home and build tactile things that your students can interact with or that your kids can interact with at home. So for the last slide, I'll put up our list of summer camps. We just built out a website that lists all of these in one place. But please note the School for the Deaf and School for the Visually Impaired in Baton Rouge is having summer camp all June, and it's open to any students in the state. They don't have to be enrolled there. And if I think it's kind of first come, first serve for transportation and lodging. But for, especially older students that would be excited kind of to do sleepaway camp, it's a great option. The STEM Center camps in Alabama for high schoolers are great for deaf, hard of hearing high schoolers. Bell Camp in Reston, they get to do Braille. They get to do a lot of different activities for blind kids. And then Lighthouse, Louisiana also has a summer camp in June. So a lot of them kind of overlap, but I'll send these slides out in the link for camp. Okay, any questions, comments, things that I missed that y'all want to add that your families have benefited from? Okay. Well, let me just go to our last slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. The last thing I want to mention, the I Can Connect program for students that have any combined hearing and vision loss is a federally funded program that can get them access to technology like an iPad or a laptop that they can use at home, as well as Braille displays if you have students who are learning Braille. So it's just for deafblind students, but it is a really wonderful program. So if you're sending kids home to the summer and they're not going to have technology over the summer to access some of these things, that's a great resource too to get them set up. So if you have questions for that, certainly reach out. Feel free to put any questions or comments or additions you have in the chat as well. Our next Lunch and Learn next month, Friday, May 10th at noon, is on annual transition strategies. And so that is a great one to plug into as the school year wraps up and you get ready for those transitions. And here's a QR code if you don't mind just scanning it. We have a really brief survey. We do collect survey data and read it and think about it and use it also to report to our funders. So I'm always grateful when people take the time to provide us with some good feedback. So thank you so much for joining. And like I said, any last questions or resources, feel free to come off mute and jump in.
Nikki, your QR code slide is not showing. You're showing the
Oh,
website.
I'm sorry. I didn't switch over the share. Sorry, y'all. Here you go. Okay, can you see it now?
There we go. Yep, thank you.
Great, there we go. Next Lunch and Learn and the QR code. Apologies for that.